The war between the Israeli army and Hamas is entering a new and major phase. In addition to the air and naval operations, new breakthroughs are taking place in the ground offensive, and Israel is taking the war to a whole new level. With 300,000 troops and hundreds of tanks massed on the Gaza border, the ground offensive has advanced to the deepest depths of Gaza. In breaking statements, Israeli officials announced the army's advance and painted a portrait of the course of the war. Israel said in a statement that its ground forces were battling Hamas fighters deep inside Gaza's largest city, marking a major new phase in the conflict that began a month ago, and that its leaders envisioned controlling the security of the area after the war. The crackdown on Gaza City and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's comments about controlling Gaza's security for an indefinite period of time signaled the uncertain final phase of a war that Israel said would be long and difficult. Israeli ground troops have been fighting Hamas in Gaza for more than a week, cutting the territory in two and laying siege to Gaza City. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, the Army's chief spokesman, said that Israeli ground forces are currently engaged in a ground operation deep inside Gaza City, putting great pressure on Hamas. This means that after the siege of Gaza City was completed, the IDF increased its attacks on Hamas's last defenses in the city. Shortly after capturing the Hamas divisional headquarters, the IDF took control of a second Hamas military stronghold in the northern Gaza Strip. IDF fighters from the 7th Armored Brigade were assisted by the Air Force, which struck a cell containing about a dozen Hamas members before directing ground forces into the stronghold. Anti-tank missiles and launchers, weapons and various intelligence materials were captured. The Army also hit dozens of mortar launchers along the strip overnight. Moreover, the Navy operated in Gaza earlier in the day, striking strategic Hamas targets, including outposts that the IDF said were technological assets. Elsewhere in the strip, a Hamas cell barricaded near Al-Quds Hospital was eliminated by IDF warplanes in cooperation with the IDF's 36th Armored Division. The Army said that the cell was planning to launch an attack on ground forces from its barricaded position. The airstrike on the cell caused a large secondary explosion on the ground adjacent to the hospital. This indicates the presence of explosives and other Hamas weapons stored near the hospital. At this point, Hamas appears to have no real ability to stop the advance of Israeli armored forces. A formidable array of armored vehicles and heavy firepower are advancing after a barrage designed to overwhelm the enemy and trap them in their hiding places. Hamas's operational strategy is to harass Israeli forces from inside the tunnels after they have established themselves in relatively static positions. This requires the IDF to be constantly on the move, which is why the IDF is constantly changing positions and expanding its attacks on Hamas targets. The expanding attacks will continue until Israel rescues all of its hostages and completely eradicates Hamas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in an interview the other day that there will be no ceasefire until all Hamas hostages are released. However, Netanyahu also suggested that humanitarian efforts could be temporarily halted. Netanyahu also signaled that Israeli troops could remain in Gaza indefinitely. The Prime Minister said that, "I think Israel will have overall security responsibility for an indefinite period of time, because we have seen what happens when we don't have that responsibility. When we don't have security responsibility, we face an explosion of Hamas terror on a scale that we can't even imagine." Defense Minister Yoav Gallant echoed Netanyahu's sentiments, saying that the army has entered deeper into Gaza. Gallant and Hagari continued to threaten to assassinate Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's Gaza chief, but refused to set a time for such an assassination. Israeli officials also refused to set a timetable for the capture of Gaza's Shifa hospital, where several senior Hamas officials are said to be hiding. Major General Yaron Finkelman, head of the IDF's Southern Command, said in a speech that the IDF had struck at the heart of Hamas's capabilities. Finkelman added that the main objective of the war was to dismantle Hamas and rescue the hostages. Speaking in Beirut, Hamas spokesman Ghazi Hamad denied that Israeli forces had made significant military gains or advanced deeper into Gaza City. Hamad said that Israel never gives the truth to the people, claiming that Hamas killed many Israeli soldiers and destroyed many tanks. However, despite the two late-evening volleys, the soldiers increased the pressure on the enemy, while Hamas fired fewer rockets than it has in weeks. Although the IDF refused to provide statistics on Hamas rocket fire, sources confirmed that the overall number was much lower than in recent days. The drop, albeit temporary, was notable both in the number of rocket siren warnings and in the impact on Tel Aviv and central areas. For a few days in the first and second weeks of the war, there was a decrease in rocket fire. However, these were replaced by subsequent increases in launches, so it is unclear whether the decrease is part of a trend. Most importantly, the IDF was unable to say whether the advance in the occupation led to a reduction or whether it was a temporary tactical move by Hamas. Hamas claims it fired rockets at Tel Aviv, but no sirens were heard in the area. Sources said Hamas fired rockets in the general direction of Tel Aviv, but that they all landed in the sea and were not close enough to trigger an alert. In the north, however, Hezbollah continued its trend of escalating rocket provocations, firing a barrage of 20 rockets into Israel and sounding sirens in the Galilee and Golan Heights. Initial reports did not indicate any injuries or damage. The IDF responded to the sources of rocket fire with artillery fire. The rocket attacks from Lebanon came shortly after the IDF attacked cells of armed men near the border, as well as shooting down an unidentified aerial object approaching Israeli airspace. Hezbollah and Israel also continued to exchange cross-border fire. In another incident, the IDF said it attacked a Hezbollah cell attempting to launch an anti-tank missile against the agricultural community of Shtula in the Upper Galilee. IDF artillery also responded with shelling to a Lebanese attack on an Israeli outpost near Aramsha in the western Galilee. Jerusalem reacted more harshly against Hezbollah in the past day, but today returned to an overly restrained and measured response. Also in the West Bank, the IDF said it arrested more suspects, bringing the number of arrests since the start of the war to 870 members of Hamas and other terrorist groups, out of a total of 1,350 arrests. The arrest rate has dropped slightly in the past 2 weeks, while the ratio of Hamas arrests to total arrests has remained the same. Meanwhile, Israelis marked the milestone 30th day of Jewish mourning, since Hamas killed 1,400 people on October 7th in an attack that sparked a war in southern Israel. Some 240 people kidnapped by Hamas during the attack remained in Gaza, and more than 250,000 Israelis evacuated homes near the Gaza and Lebanon borders because of the constant rocket fire into Israel. According to the Ministry of Health in the Hamas-ruled territory, a month of incessant shelling in Gaza has caused more than 10,300 casualties. To summarize, the Israeli army is making a concerted effort to advance deeper into Gaza and eliminate Hamas. As a result of this effort, Hamas's capabilities are being eliminated one by one, and the escalated attacks are endangering residential areas. This danger reaches its peak when Hamas uses residents as human shields. We hope that Hamas's behavior and aggressive behavior will come to an end as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.